Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you were here. Thanks for tuning in.
Greetings. My name is the Revolutionary Matron, and my show is called The Learning Curve. I broadcast on a network called KWAZ Radio. There are other hosts on the network I'd like you to meet.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed here belong solely to the respondent, and they do not necessarily reflect any broadcast networks, affiliates, nor sponsors. The Learning Curve is a broadcast created for the benefit of my global community. Black is a consciousness. Content is being used for our commentary, research, criticism, education, scholarship, teaching, preaching, and news reporting. No copyright infringement is intended. I will make enunciation mistakes. I will give you my opinion about the information. And if you ever ask, I will send you my source.
This week's reading starts at page 139 and goes to page 155 in the book Marcus Garvey and the Vision of Africa. Today we're reading Marcus Garvey in his own words, Why the Black Star Line Failed. These are from a weekly series published in the Pittsburgh Courier from February 22nd, 1930 until May 31st of 1931. So now we get to understand his perspective on why the Black Star Line failed. Greetings, Oni, from the Pro-Black Perspective. Thanks for tuning in. The Black Star Line Steamship Corporation that I organized in 1919 under the charter from the state of Delaware was the great attraction that brought the Universal Negro Improvement Association millions of supporters. Having traveled extensively throughout the world and seriously studying the economical, commercial, and industrial needs of our people, I found out the quickest and easiest way to reach them was by steamship communication. So immediately after I succeeded in forming the Universal Negro Improvement Association in America, I launched the idea of floating ships under the direction of Negroes. I thought if we could if we could launch our ships and have our own Black captains and officers, our race too would be respected in the mercantile and commercial world, thereby adding appreciative dignity to our downtrodden people. With this aim in view, I circulated the whole world for support of the Black Star Line. My appeal was heard and responded to immediately in such places as Cuba, Panama, and Costa Rica, and other Central American republics. Most of the people who responded were West Indians who could appreciate the value of steamship communication. The call to distant Africa was answered also. In the space of 2 or 3 months of the corporation, the Black Star Line was able to purchase its first ship, the SS Yarmouth, which was rechristened the SS Frederick Douglass. It was not until after the first ship was launched in New York that the American Negroes got to know what it was all about and subscribed speedily their quota to help purchase other ships. My great difficulties in leading the Universal Negro Improvement Association and directing the affairs of the Black Star Line really came really through the invisible influences that were operating against me all over the world, caused through the secret propaganda of other Negroes against me in impressing prominent members of the white race and their government that I was a bad man. My first enemies in New York, namely Samuel Duncan, Richard Warner, Edgar Gray, and Adolphus Domingo, did everything to influence the district attorney's office of New York to prevent me in carrying out the idea of launching ships for the Negro race. Mr. Edwin P. Kilrow was then assistant district attorney. He, on several occasions, threatened me with imprisonment if I continued in the idea. When the organization of the Negro Improvement Association was started in New York, I had altercations with Samuel Duncan, whom I had to depose from the position of president of the first New York organization. This man's revenge ran so far that he wrote confidential letters to all the British colonial and imperial governments, warning them that, and I quote, Marcus Garvey, a dangerous Negro agitator who desired to stir up hatred between the colored and the white people, had now made a serious attempt to get in touch with the colored people of the world through the launching of steamships, and that it would be wise for all good governments to undertake to prevent the entry of the ships of the Black Star Line into their ports on their countries. Into the ports of their countries. Associated with Duncan in this was Adolphus Domingo, already referred to as Domingo. Domingo was first associated with me as editor of the Negro World. We were friends from boyhood, but because of my success, he became jealous of me and became a communist. While editing my paper, he attempted to impress his communistic views upon the readers and myself, even though he knew we had no inclinations towards communism. We disagreed on policy and he left the paper. He linked up with other communists like Cyril Briggs, who was running a magazine called The Crusader, and Chandler Owen, and another red socialist. They kept up a continuous tirade against me. In fact, Domingo and others did everything to sabotage the Black Star Line. They were never satisfied until the venture went under. As a retort to Kilrow and all those who were endeavoring to intimidate me, I stated that we would launch our ships even if we had to do so in an ocean of blood. This statement somewhat scared those who were trying to intimidate us. On a day in October of 1919, we launched in the New York harbor the first boat of our line. Excuse me. The first boat of our line. That was a day never to be forgotten. It was a Sunday. Hundreds of thousands of people gathered at the foot of the 125th Street Pier at the North River to see the boat sail under the black captain. People also gathered in thousands on Riverside Drive to witness the wonderful spectacle. The fact that Negroes had launched a ship in New York became a world sensation, and the news was flashed from one center of our civilization to the next. Thousands of letters of inquiry came from all parts of the world. The result of all this tended to create more branches of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. There is no doubt that the Negro is his own greatest enemy. He is jealous of himself, envious, and covetous. This accounts for most of our failure in business and in other things. This, I know, was responsible for the collapse of the Black Star Line, in addition to the dishonesty of the race itself, the race to itself. In calling our people dishonest to ourselves, I do not mean to infer that the white or other races are not dishonest, but they are dishonest with a method or a system. The Negro has no method or system in his dishonesty. The Negro should, like the Jews, adopt a method of dealing with himself. If he is to steal, he should, like the Jews, steal from others, but not from himself. For 1 year, I unreservedly gave my entire self to the talking for the Black Star Line, so as to influence the people in buying stock, a penny's worth of which I never sold myself, and $1 of which money I never handled. All the money for the Black Star Line went through the New York office, from which I was generally absent 9 months out of a year. The handling of the money took place generally when I was 2,000 or 3,000 miles away. I had therefore to rely on the honesty of the other officers, such as the secretary, the treasurer, and the vice president. They betrayed me and destroyed the hopes I had in view, as made manifest by the fact that with such a splendid start, we had accumulated nearly $750,000 in 10 months. The Black Star Line is nowhere today. Unfortunately, the Negro, growing up with the disposition of playing dishonest with himself, hence the great difficulty to promote successful Negro enterprises on a large scale. When I started the Black Star Line, I had the greatest confidence in every Negro first. I believed every Negro felt like I did and was a great enthusiast to see the race go forward in success. Therefore, in selecting directors and officers of the Black Star Line, I did so with an open mind to everybody, and that's a problem. I had Americans, West Indians, South Americans. I gave everybody a chance. And the story is that very nearly everyone that I placed in responsible position fleeced the Black Star Line. The fellow that I made secretary, who was a clever, well trained accountant from British Guiana, who could not be eclipsed for competency anywhere, after 3 months was unable to account for 50,000 shares of the stock of the Black Star Line. He was one of the original members of the New York division of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. It was during the war period, and he could earn much more money at Trenton, New Jersey, working in ammunition factories than he could in New York. He left New York and went to Trenton. When the Black Star Line was formed and I was looking for men of ability, I thought of him. I offered him a position. He accepted the offer but stated to me that he had not enough money to pay the railroad fare to New York. I sent him the money. The fellow, through his poor financial condition, would be rated as an ordinary working man with about 3 or 4 suits of clothes. He came to New York and was inducted into office as secretary of the corporation. We started to sell stock and the people brought it with a tremendous go. Thus, this man earning $50 a week started receiving thousands of dollars daily to handle. He was the man who received all the cash. Sometimes $15,000 would pass through the mails, and sometimes he would take over the counter at the office in New York and at Liberty Hall $10,000 a day. About 1 month after he was with us, I noticed a great change in his personality. He had become a fashionable sport. He used to change his suits almost twice a day. At the end of the second month, he came to me and said, "Mr. Garvey, aren't you going to buy an automobile?" I replied, "Buy an automobile? For what and with what?" I was then getting $50 a week also. I said, "I can't afford to buy an automobile." He said, "Chief, I would like to buy a knockabout, but I was watching you." I became very suspicious of the man after 3 months when an inventory was made. We found that 50,000 shares could not be accounted for. There is another fellow whom I may bring out pointedly, whom I gave the position of passage and traffic superintendent. This man, although possessing very fine qualifications like the secretary, couldn't do better than work in a factory. It was out of the factory that I took him. He was in ordinary circumstances when he came to us. His clothes were not the best, but after 2 months, this Negro was the best dressed man in Harlem, a fashion plate. He also had all the women around, and to my surprise, after a while, he also had under his influence my first wife. The interested or inquiring person may ask, how is it that your secretary was not able to account for 50,000 shares and your treasurer and the other officials were able to do so many things to the failure of the Black Star Line? Did you not keep proper books? The answer is yes. In the history of the Black Star Line, I had two of the best firms of chartered accountants in New York to open and start the sets of books to be used by the corporation and to audit them. I had competent men to keep the books in keeping with the instructions and advice of the accountants, but they would not make the regular and proper entries. And by the end of the month, they had forgotten a dozen times. Whenever I called in an outside party to give me expert information, the rest of the fellows inside would organize themselves against the person getting the kind of information he needed. It was always a case of Mr. So and so had been using it and it can't be found, or some such excuse. Whenever anyone suspected an investigation was going to be made by me, that person would find an excuse to leave the position. Another one would take charge, and then whatever the wrong, it was shifted to the other person or persons not to be identified. If Jesus was the accountant or president of the Black Star Line, he would he could not have done better than I or the accountant did, because the men had their disposition to steal and hide. They did everything to embarrass an honest investigation. And because I was president of such a corporation, I had to bear the blunt. In the early part of January 1920, I was in Canada on my honeymoon, having been married on December 25th of 1919. Whilst I was away, several scheming white business sharpers from Wall Street, who had during my presence in New York tried to involve me and the Black Star Line in shady transactions, took advantage of my absence in striking up some arrangement with the secretary and the treasurer of the company, who, like most Negroes, felt that they had as much of a right as their superior officers to negotiate and handle vital business matters. The result was that our first ship, the SS Frederick Douglass, was chartered to a company of irresponsible brokers for the removal of a cargo of whiskey and other spirituous liquors. under prohibition by the 17th of the month. According to the new prohibition law that had come into effect, all spirituous liquor had to be disposed of in a limited time in the United States or be confiscated. I knew nothing about the contract when it was negotiated. No one mentioned anything to me about it. Not until it was discovered that the company was receiving 7,000 for removing the cargo that was valued at 5 million at the tremendous risk of being responsible for the cargo to its full value and with the possibility of losing our ship if the ship did not set sail an hour before the prohibition law went into effect. On my arrival in New York, there was only one thing for me to do. That was to see the contract was immediately executed as so as to avoid other liabilities. I called upon the captain and therefore to make preparation for the ship to sail with the cargo. It turned out that under the direction of the captain, $11,000 had to be spent for repairs. I was therefore called upon to spend $11,000 for repairs in order to have the ship set sail with a cargo valued at $5 million on which the company was selling, upon which the company was only collecting 7,000 as freight. All because of the disobedience of two officers of the company who took advantage of my absence in dealing with men I had already turned down. Greetings, Forecast. How are you today? Oni says, that's why I can't be harsh on him. He got a capable accountant and they still betrayed him. Loyalty is key. Greetings, Anthony McPhail. How are you tonight? After this, my suspicions in all things were aroused, and I made certain investigations and found out that the Black Star Line and I, its president, had often been called upon to pay repair bills for the ships running into the thousands, on which certain officers of the ships collected 20 or 30% from the engineers on repairs that were called upon to be done that were not necessary, unless to supply the officers with their percentages. So remember last time the captain was talking about all the repair work that needed to be done, but they were getting a kickback. This kind of fraud was also practiced in buying supplies for the ships. When ship chandeliers chandlers were given orders running into thousands of dollars, out of which they had to pay the officers of the company on the ships responsible between 15 and 35% commission. I, determined to bring the employment of the captain and the secretary to an end, but in the separation of the captain and the secretary from the Black Star Line, a loss was left behind the hundreds of thousands of dollars. After having gotten rid of one group, I thought I would have been safe in the hands of another. This Barbadian, whom I made first vice president and general manager of the Black Star Line, came to me with a sad story that he wanted me to give him a chance, which I was glad to do. There was no doubt about this man's qualifications. If he were a white man and honest, he could have made a fortune for his company and himself in Wall Street. After the management was passed over to this man, who had so much business experience, I had to take my circuit on the road to help improve my organizations as usual. This man went about and made connections in the commercial areas, which turned out to be connections with the very white men who were desirous of destroying the Black Star Line. At this time, we had we had under repairs at the Morse dock in Brooklyn the SS Antonio Maceo, a yacht that we had brought from the interests of H. Rogers, which we were reconditioning for passenger service between Central America and the West Indies. I was to have sailed on this boat on the trip contemplated to Central America and the West Indies. It happened, however, that whilst I made an arrangement with the Morse to repair the boat for 15,000 and left for a trip to California and the West, Morse found out that his profit would not have been enough at 15,000. So during my absence, he entered into an agreement with the vice president, which gave Morse the option to violate the first agreement I made, not only concerning the boat, but the specified time for the 15,000, which he changed to an indefinite amount of time and unlimited amounts for the repairs. My indictment for using the United States mails to defraud occurs as follows. First, I was the only person indicted in that I was the only person wanted. I was arrested around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and between my being taken from my home to the U.S. Commissioner's office for bail, the secretary handed over the books to the district attorney's office without my instructions or any information to me. This made me feel that there was a conspiracy to get me alone. When the matter was thoroughly gone into, it probably was discovered that the attempt to get me alone was too glaring, and that I was only president of the corporation, and that there were others who who took as prominent a part, if not more, than myself in the daily routine of the corporation's business. So, several months after, there was another indictment which included the vice president, the secretary, the treasurer, and myself. Through private information, I knew, however, that the other men were only brought in to take off the suspicion of wanting to get me singularly. During the time of the indictment, I had occasion to have the secretary of the Black Star Line, who was the Auditor General of the UNIA, arrested for forgery and embezzlement. The chancellor of the Universal Negro Improvement Association one day made up his lodgment of the association's funds for the bank. He had the money, checks, and American greenbacks resting on the sideboard of his desk. The Auditor General came down from his office to the Chancellor's office and engaged him in conversation, then slipped in among the lodgment money, a forged check for $50 made out to the name of James Moore, who resided in Canada and was formerly an official of the Kansas Division of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and a barber well known to me. The Auditor General took out the $50 of American greenbacks. Immediately after this, I entered the Chancellor's office just by curiosity to find out what the amount of the lodgment was for the day. The Chancellor immediately turned over the amount he had for the lodgment and stated to check over. I watched him carefully and I saw a peculiar looking check. I asked him where he got it from. He said he could not remember seeing it before. I saw that the signature on the check was that of James Moore, but the writing was that of the secretary of the Black Star Line. I took the check from the chancellor half an hour later. I called down the stenographer from the secretary's office to inquire where the check was. The young lady said he was out for about half an hour. I immediately ordered his office closed and nailed up the door. It was evident that the news of my discovery got to him because he kept away all day. I remained in my office until 6 o'clock in the afternoon. As I was about to leave, he came into the building and confessed. He beseeched me to give him another chance, another hearing before I took steps to prosecute him. I promised him I would. The next morning, he offered to give up the securities he had in the organization and immediately vacate his position. I told him I could not accept that because it was a bad example. I therefore summoned him before the magistrate at the High Court, where he was examined and held for the grand jury. He was indicted and tried for the Petty Session Court and found guilty and was to be sentenced at a later hearing. Later, the combination of my enemies became his prosecutors, and at the second hearing, he was acquitted. Wow. This man had under his control all the books of the corporation for 2 years. He had been carrying on that kind of practice as explained above with no one to check him. What the secretary did in his way as an indication of what the vice president did in his way. So when I stood indicted along with these men, I found myself in the company of enemies who were working with my outside enemies to defeat me and send me to prison because I stood in their way of making easy fortunes. At the trial, I was represented by an array of counsel, but after the first day's hearing, I discovered that there was an arrangement whereby I was to be found guilty and disposed of as the court felt, after my attorney made the plea for mercy to further humiliate me. I detected that I would have been sent to prison on 26 counts on which I was to be tried, each of which carried 5 years imprisonment and a fine of $1,000. I found out that the counsel had arranged with the district attorney to give him 2 weeks for the prosecution and to take 1 week for me in my defense, so as to allow the judges and others to go on their vacations. I immediately lost faith in my counsel and urged him to retire from the case, which I tried myself. The trial took 5.5 weeks, and every day of it was a terrible fight between myself and the district attorney, one Mr. Maxwell Maddock. As I went through the trial, I saw there was almost an impossibility for me to escape the traps that were laid for me, in which the press, rival organizations, personal enemies, big business, foreign and other governments were interested to the point of seeing me convicted. No one, not even the ablest attorney, could have fought for me as I fought for myself, because he would be risking the friendship and goodwill of the powerful influences that were aligned against me. The evidence on which I was convicted is told as follows. Benny Darcy, who worked at the Pennsylvania Railroad in the Postal Department, testified that he received a letter from the Black Star Line. He could not tell what was contained in the letter, nor could he identify the letter, only the empty envelope with his name typed on it, which bore the rubber stamp to the Black Star Line. He testified having received the envelope through the mail. It isn't necessary to go into the merits of the evidence here, but it would have been easy. It could have been easy for my enemies to have the rubber stamp of the Black Star Line affixed to the envelope and posted to the man. The principal witness to state the fact that letters were mailed from the office of the Black Star Line to two different places and parties was a boy who I never saw, who could not even remember the persons employed by the Black Star Line during the time he was supposed to be employed there. He was unable to tell where the General Post Office of Harlem was. He could not even tell who used to pay him during the time He was supposed to be working for the Black Star Line. Nevertheless, with all that was said and done, I was convicted for one count of the original 26, the penalty of a sentence of 5 years or a fine of $1,000 or both, the passing of the sentence resting with the discretion of the judge. The judge, however, sentenced me to 5 years with a fine of $1,000 and the cost of the trial. He also denied me the right to bail pending appeal to the District Court of Appeals. I was therefore confined to the Tombs prison for several months awaiting the decision of the appellate court. It was only through the good office of President Harding that I was allowed out on bail. When the question of bail came up, the trial judge insisted on a bond of $50,000, but President Harding prevailed with the district attorney, Colonel Haywood, and I was released on a bond of $1,500. It was rumored during my conviction and pending appeal before the District Court of Appeal that if I would keep quiet, the appeal would not be heard or would be decided in my favor. There was no doubt that several governments of Europe were feeling the effects of the new spirit and racial consciousness that had come over the Negro people of the world. Big commercial houses in America were afraid of the result of my encouraging Negroes to develop their own business enterprises and trading among themselves. The big shipping companies were also determined to keep the Negro off the high seas. When I was told of what would happen if I kept quiet, I became more determined to prosecute the idea that was uppermost in my mind. So I launched out immediately to organize a new line of steamships, the Black Cross Navigation and Trading Company. The forces fighting me heard about it and launched more propaganda against me. But not 2 months after my release from the tombs, the people rallied around me and we purchased our biggest ship, the SS General Goethals, afterwards rechristened the SS Booker T. Washington, from the Panama Railroad Company in A1 condition. When the boat was acquired, the sentiment from my enemies was stirred to force the decision of the District Court of Appeal, and so the very day the SS General Goethals was sent, or the SS Booker T. Washington was to set sail from Norfolk, Virginia to the West Indies to engage in the banana business and the conveyance of general freight, the decision was given against me in the appeal. 2 days after, I had to surrender for imprisonment. So that's what happened with the Black Star Line as far as Marcus Garvey is concerned. He had a lot of disloyal people, disloyal crooks in his midst. Now we'll read his speech before incarceration in the Tombs prison, presented June 17th, 1923. Now understand me well. Marcus Garvey has entered the fight for the emancipation of race. Marcus Garvey has entered the fight for the redemption of a country. From the graves of millions of my forebears, at this hour I hear the cry, and I am going to answer it, even though hell is cut loose before Marcus Garvey. From the silent graves of millions who went down to make me what I am, I make for them, I make for their memory. This fight shall leave a glaring page in the history of man. I did not bring myself here. They brought me from my silent repose in Africa 300 years ago. And this is only the first Marcus Garvey. They have thought that they could, for 300 years, brutalize a race. They have thought that they could, for 300 years, steep the soul of a race in blood and darkness and let it go at that. they make a terrible mistake. Marcus Garvey shall have revenge in the blood of his sires. So don't be afraid of Marcus Garvey. When Marcus Garvey goes to jail, the world of Negroes will know they have come at the wrong time. I repeat, if they think they can stamp out the souls of 400 million Black men, they make a tremendous and terrible mistake. We are no longer dogs. We are no longer peons. We are no longer serfs. We are men. Tell us about fear. We were not born with fear. Intimidation does not drive fear into the soul of Marcus Garvey. There is no fear but the fear of God. Man cannot drive into the fear of man because man is the equal man. The world is crazy and foolish if they think that they can destroy the principles, the ideals of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. So that was Marcus Garvey referring to himself in third person as he was getting ready to go into the tombs. Bwana Haguziki says, who was vetting the people he was hiring, or was he just hiring people because they sold him a good story? Greetings to you, Bwana Haguziki. I don't know who is vetting his people. He says that they came with recommendations and that they came with all of these accolades, but I'm going to tell you something that is true. People lie. People lie about their qualifications and credentials to get jobs all the time. And then they come with a good story. This is Marcus Garvey writing a letter to Guy M. Walker, dated March 10th of 1924. My dear Mr. Walker, I am charged with the duty and responsibility of writing to you on the subject which I feel you are interested in because of your high and elevated position in the nation and because of the humanitarianism which is to be which is felt to be beyond question. The subject is that of the Negro problem as it confronts us not only in America but in the world. There is a deep and earnest desire on the part of some of the world's most forward-looking statesmen and humanitarians to make an immediate effort for the settlement of the perplexing and grievous question of race. We in America should not delay the settlement of this great question because it cannot settle itself. The Universal Negro Improvement Association, an organization of 6 million scattered members, of which I am President General, is working for a solution of the problem through the founding and establishing in Africa of a nation for Negroes, where the race will be given the fullest opportunity to develop itself, such as we may not expect in countries where we form but a minority in a majority government of other races. There is no doubt that the 20th century Negro in America is different from the Negro in the last century. Today, he is forward-looking and ambitious. He is a product of our best schools, colleges, and universities. With his training, he is not prepared to be satisfied as a secondary consideration in the social, economic, and political life of the nation. By his ambition, he is aspiring to the highest in political office and industrial and social positions. This, under the Constitution, cannot be reasonably denied him. But in the midst of a majority race that is not inclined to allow the minority to enjoy the benefits of the best that the nation affords, we have the great problem that must be solved. It is not the humanitarians like you of the white race that the Negro fears, nor those who are broad-minded enough to consider the rights of man regardless of color, but it is the great mass that does not think in the higher terms of humanity, but who are guided purely and simply by their economic, social, and political relationship to others. We of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, after having taken into consideration the possibility of the liberal and humanitarian view to curb successfully the passion of the great mass, are now endeavoring to so create sentiment among the 15 million Negroes of America and other parts of the world as to lead them to see that the only and best solution for the race problem is for us to have a nation of our own in Africa, whereby we would not be regarded in countries like America as competitors of the white race for the common positions in politics, industry, and society, but that we would be regarded as people striving in our own country to present to the world a civilization and culture of our own. Knowing that you must have some feeling on a question like this led the Universal Negro Improvement Association to direct me to write you, asking for a frank and open opinion of our program. The opinion that you give will be kept private if you so desire. Your wishes on this matter shall be respected in every particular. The following symposium is therefore submitted to you most respectfully, and we are asking that you be good enough to answer each question in conjunction with this communication so that we may be able to judge how much sympathy there is running among the leaders of the white race in this community as touching the effort we are making for the solution to the vexed problem of race in America, which is very annoying. Symposium 1. These were the questions. Do you believe the Negro to be a human being? Do you believe the Negro entitled to all the rights of humanity? Do you believe that the Negro should be taught not to aspire to be the best imitation of the white man, but the best product of himself? Do you believe that the Negro should be encouraged to develop a society of his own that is for social intercourse and marrying within his own race? Do you believe that the Negro should be taught not to aspire to the highest political positions and governments of the white race, but to such positions among his own race in a government of his own? Do you believe that the Negro should have a government of his own in Africa? Would you help morally or otherwise to bring about such a possibility? Do you believe that the Negro should be encouraged to aspire to the highest industrial and commercial positions in the countries of the white man in competition with him and to his exclusion? Do you believe that the Negro should be encouraged to create positions of his own industry and commerce in a country of his own with the privilege of trading with other races of the world? Do you believe that the Negro should be encouraged to regard and respect the rights of all other races in the same manner as other races would respect the rights of the Negro? Should 5 or 6 million or any large number of Negroes in the United States desire a repatriation to Africa for the peaceful building up of a country of their own, or for the settlement of such countries are established among Negroes without any serious handicap to the industries of America, would you assist in this direction? And those were the 11 questions he had. It is felt that you will give deep consideration to this communication and receive it in the spirit which it is written, that of a desire to settle amicably a vexed question. I am forwarding you, along with this letter, three pamphlets which we ask that you read without prejudice, but with a feeling of broad mindedness and a desire to help settle a troublesome problem that confronts your race. Knowing your broadness of vision and your liberality of soul leads me to feel that you will judge the subject matter of the pamphlets with fairness to my race that has suffered in slavery for 250 years and still confronts with obstacles to be sympathetically overcome. With the very best wishes for your health success and hoping for an immediate reply, I have the honor to be your humble and obedient servant, Marcus Garvey. So, as you can see, Garvey was writing to white people to ask them what their opinions were, to find out what challenges he might face. Oni says, yeah, it's hard to say how he could have done it better. People overrate themselves, and a lot of us only receive qualifications from whites. That's in talking about in regards to whether or not Marcus Garvey actually had anyone vetting these people. It was the early 20th century. He had no way to verify these people. They came to him with a story and credentials. And I think just like people today will lie on resumes, people were lying at that time. African fundamentalism. We're going to go a little bit longer today, but it won't be too long. This one is only a few pages. African fundamentalism, published by the UNIA, copyright 1925. A racial hierarchy and empire for Negroes, Negro faith must be confidence in self, his creed, one God, one aim, one destiny. The time has come for the Negro to forget and cast behind him his hero worship and adoration of other races, and to start out immediately to create and emulate heroes of his own. We must canonize our own saints, create our own martyrs, and elevate to positions of fame and honor Black men and women who have made distinct contributions to our racial history. Sojourner Truth is worthy of the place of sainthood alongside Joan of Arc. Crispus Attucks and George William Gordon are entitled to the halo of martyrdom with no less glory than that of the martyrs of any other race. Toussaint Louverture's brilliancy as a soldier and statesman outshone that of a Cromwell, Napoleon, and Washington. Hence, he is entitled to the highest place as a hero among men. Africa has produced countless numbers of men and women in war and in peace whose luster and bravery outshine that of any other people. Then why not see good and perfection in ourselves? We must inspire a literature and promulgate a doctrine of our own without any apologies to the powers that be. The right is ours and God's. Let contrary sentiment and cross opinions go to the winds. Opposition to race independence is the weapon of the enemy to defeat the hopes of an unfortunate people. We are entitled to our own opinions and not obligated to or bound by the opinions of others. A peep at the past. If others laugh at you, return the laughter to them. If they mimic you, return the compliment with equal force. They have no more right to dishonor, disrespect, and disregard your feeling and manhood than you have in dealing with them. Honor them when they honor you, and disrespect and disregard them when they treat you vilely. Their arrogance is but skin deep and an assumption that has no foundation in morals or law. They have sprung from the same family tree of obscurity as we have. Their history is as rude in its primitiveness as ours. Their ancestors ran wild and naked, lived in caves and in branches of trees like monkeys, like ours. They made human sacrifices, ate the flesh of their own dead and raw meat of the wild beasts for centuries, even as they accuse us of doing. Their cannibalism was more prolonged than ours. When we were embracing the arts and sciences on the banks of the Nile, their ancestors were still drinking human blood and eating out of the skulls of their conquered dead. When our civilization had reached the noonday of progress, they were still running naked and sleeping in holes and caves with rats, bats, and other insects and animals. After we had already fathomed the mystery of the stars and reduced the heavenly constellations to minute and regular calculus, they were still backwoodsmen living in ignorance and blatant darkness. Why be discouraged? The world today is indebted to us for the benefits of civilization. They stole our arts and sciences from Africa. Then why should we be ashamed of ourselves? Their modern improvements are but duplicates of a grander civilization that we reflected thousands of years ago, without the advantage of what is buried and is still hidden, to be resurrected and reintroduced by the intelligence of our generation and our posterity. Why should we be discouraged? Because someday somebody laughs at us today? Who can tell us what tomorrow will bring forth? Did they not laugh at Moses, Christ, and Mohammed? Was there not a Carthage, Greece, and Rome? We see and have changes every day. So pray, work, be steadfast, and be not dismayed. Nothing must kill the empire urge. As the Jew is held together by his religion, the whites by the assumption and the unwritten law of superiority, and the Mongolian by the precious tie of blood, so likewise the Negro must be united in one grand racial hierarchy. Our union must know no clime, boundary, or nationality. Like the great Church of Rome, Negroes the world over must practice one faith, that of confidence in themselves, with one God, one aim, one destiny. Let no religious scruples, no political machination divide us, but let us hold together under all climes and in every country, making among ourselves a racial empire upon which the sun shall never set. Allegiance to self first. Let no voice but your own speak to you from the depths. Let no influence but your own rouse you in time of peace and time of war. Hear all, but attend only to that which concerns you. Your allegiances shall be your God, then to your family, race, and country. Remember always that the Jew in his political and economic urge is always first a Jew. The white man is first a white man under all circumstances, and you can do no less than being first and always a Negro, and then all else will take care of itself. Let no one inoculate you with evil doctrines to set their own conveniences. There is no humanity before that which starts with yourself. Charity begins at home. First to thyself be true, and thou canst not then be false to any man. We are arbiters of our own destiny. God and nature made us what we are, and then out of our own created genius, we make ourselves what we want to be. Follow always that great law. Let the sky and God be our limit and eternity our measurement. There is no height to which we cannot climb by using the active intelligence of our own minds. Mind creates, and as much as we desire in nature, we can have through the creation of our own minds. Being at present the scientifically weaker race, you shall treat others only as they treat you. But in your homes and everywhere possible, you must teach the higher development of science to your children and be sure to develop a race of scientists par excellence. For in science and religion lies our only hope to withstand the evil designs of modern materialism. Never forget your God. Remember, we live, work, and pray for establishing of a great and binding racial hierarchy, the founding of a racial empire whose only natural, spiritual, and political limits shall be God and Africa at home and abroad. And that is the end of section 2. Years of Triumph and Years of Tragedy, 1920 through 1925. Bwana Haguzigi wants to know, was he in jail talking like this? This was after jail. That was the beginning of African fundamentalism. Imagine if all Black men had this type of confidence. The world would be a different place. Greetings, Sister Raw. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you again for that very special gift. So today, I got us out on time. It's just after 8 o'clock. It's been just about an hour. And that was Marcus Garvey and the Vision of Africa, The Years of Triumph and Tragedy, pages 139 through 159. This was Garvey in his own words, writing at different times in his career. He highlighted, we started with why the Black Star Line failed and some of the challenges that he faced. We talked about what some of his enemies did, how he was set up by these people at different times. He talked about the qualifications of the people that actually were a part of his organization, but we kind of, in the modern era reading it, we think that they were lying. He wrote letters and had a speech from the tombs. He wrote a speech from the tombs as he was getting ready to go to jail to do his 5-year bid before his appeal. Um, he made sure to refer to himself in third person, talking about what Marcus Garvey was and was not. He wrote a letter to a white philanthropist and humanitarian that he hoped would give him some support when it came to his desire to resettle Africans in Africa. And then he started and gave us the foundations of African fundamentalism, which is and the idea that we can do for ourselves and we can operate in an economy of our own making, like every other group does. At the time, the Jew was the primary outsider, and so he references Jewish people a lot and talks about whether or not we can do that same thing for ourselves. And I often talk about this thing called communalism, where you deal internally with your people one way and you deal another way with outsiders. You have internal communalism where you have a closed community of your selected people that you want to benefit, and you have external capitalism where you are dealing with everyone else as if they are truly an outsider and they are not a part of your selected group of preferred people. And if we dealt with one another that way, as Black people, we would probably be in a much better position. So we have to get to the point where we have selected our group and we have decided to benefit our group in ways that will advance our group. So I want to say thank you to the Pro Black Perspective, to Anthony McPhail, the Forecast, Bawana Haguziki, and Sister Raw. I also want to thank Sister Raw, Bawana Haguziki, the Forecast Radio, African Native, Afro Native World, and Tinkerbell 87 for your contributions to this stream. I appreciate each and every one of you. Did anyone have anything they wanted to add to the conversation or anything that they wanted to say when we talk about Marcus Garvey and his years of tragedy and triumph? Because I have been long winded tonight. I know that a lot of people have had a lot of different ideas about Garvey when it comes to why he failed with his shipping business, but it really sounds like he just got a lot of bad breaks and he needs to. There was some personal accountability and responsibility there, but he also said he wasn't even in the office most of the time. He wasn't even there. So, as you can see, he didn't really have an opportunity to even go over the books. He hired people to do that. He hired people to go over the books. He hired what he thought were qualified people to do the job that was necessary. So we can't really blame him. They had divided loyalties, and many of them were crooks. Because a confidence man can come and convince you that they are the bee's knees. And I think that that's what happened with a lot of these different positions. I think that Marcus Garvey got hoodwinked. So when we come back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll start reading part 3, The Movement in Transition, two very crucial years in the movement, 1925 to 1927. We'll start with commentaries. So I appreciate each and every one of you for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you for listening. I thank you. Um, the Pro Black Perspective says, yeah, people don't work every position generally. I think sometimes Blacks will pull one over on Blacks. I agree. Forecast is laughing at me because I said the bee's knees. So that is funny. Um, I will see you all tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we'll start our reading on page 161. So thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you. Peace, guys.